July 10th, 1968, 9 p.m. Bumpy Johnson's hospital room was dim. The machines beeped steadily, rhythmically, like a countdown. Mamie sat beside him, holding his hand. Junie Bird stood by the window, looking out at Harlem's lights. Willie Jackson was in the corner, silent, respectful. Bumpy had been drifting in and out of consciousness all day. The doctors said it was close now. Hours, maybe less. His body was shutting down, but his mind was still sharp, still calculating, still protecting.
"Mamie," Bumpy whispered. She leaned closer. "I'm here, Ellsworth. I need you to do something for me. Anything. When I die, I need you to open the safe at home. There's a letter inside, a letter I wrote years ago. What does it say? You'll know when you read it, but don't open it until after the funeral. Promise me." Mamie's eyes filled with tears. "I promise." "Good." Bumpy's breathing was labored now, each breath a struggle. "And Mamie, yeah, thank you for loving me, for staying with me through everything. I didn't deserve you. Yes, you did. You were the only man who ever saw me as more than a gangster's wife. You treated me like a queen."
"Because that's what you are." Mamie broke down then, sobbing, her head resting on Bumpy's chest. Junie turned from the window, his own eyes wet. "Boss," he said softly, "we're going to take care of everything, just like you taught us." "I know you will, Junie." Bumpy looked at Willie. "Willie, you remember what I told you in '52, before I went to Alcatraz?" Willie nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "You said protect the neighborhood, not the money, not the power, the people." "That's right. Don't ever forget that. Money comes and goes. Power is temporary. But the people, they're forever. If you protect them, they'll protect you." Bumpy closed his eyes, gathering his remaining strength. "There's one more thing I need to do." "What is it, boss?" Junie asked. "I need Father Divine. Get him here now." It was 10:47 p.m. when Father Divine walked into Bumpy Johnson's hospital room. Father Divine wasn't a Catholic priest. He was a spiritual leader, a preacher who'd built a massive following in Harlem during the Depression. He ran missions, fed the poor, gave people hope when the world had given them nothing. Bumpy and Father Divine had a complicated relationship. Bumpy was a gangster. Father Divine was a man of God. They shouldn't have been friends, but they were, because they both understood the same thing. Harlem needed protection, and protection came in many forms. "Ellsworth," Father Divine said gently, sitting beside the bed. "I came as soon as I heard." Bumpy opened his eyes, managed a weak smile. "Father, thank you for coming." "Of course, my son. What do you need?" "Confession?" Bumpy laughed, a sound that turned into a cough. "No, Father, I think it's too late for that. God knows what I've done. I'm not asking for forgiveness." "Then what?" "I need you to deliver a message." "To who?" "To everyone, at my funeral." Father Divine frowned. "What kind of message?" Bumpy took a breath, his voice barely a whisper now. "Tell them that Harlem was never about me. It was always about us. Tell them that the power they gave me, I'm giving back to them. Tell them to protect each other the way I tried to protect them.
Tell them not to let outsiders divide them, exploit them, destroy what we built."
Father Divine's eyes glistened. "That's a beautiful message, Ellsworth. There's more. Tell the Italians, tell the families, tell everyone who thinks they can take Harlem when I'm gone, that Harlem doesn't belong to any one man. It belongs to the people who live there, who work there, who bleed there, and those people will fight to keep it. I'll deliver your message." Bumpy's hand gripped Father Divine's with surprising strength. "And Father, pray for Mamie. Pray that she finds peace after I'm gone. She's carried my burden for too long. I will, my son, I will. Father Divine stood, placed his hand on Bumpy's forehead, and prayed, not for Bumpy's soul, though that prayer was there too, but for Harlem.
For the neighborhood that was about to lose its protector.
When Father Divine left, it was just Bumpy, Mamie, Junie, and Willie. The machines beeped slower now. Bumpy's breathing was shallow, irregular. "This is it," he whispered. "This is how it ends." Mamie squeezed his hand. "You're going to be remembered forever, Ellsworth. Not for what you took, for what you gave." Bumpy smiled one last time. Then his eyes found Junie. "Junie, come here." Junie leaned down, his ear close to Bumpy's lips. "Boss?" Bumpy's final words were so quiet that only Junie heard them. Words that would stay with Junie for the rest of his life. Words that he would share with Frank Costello 3 days later. Words that would make the most powerful mobster in New York cry like a child.
Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I tried. Tell them to do better than I did. Tell them to build something that lasts, not with fear, with love. Junie's tears fell onto Bumpy's chest. "I will, boss. I promise." At 11:52 p.m. on July 10, 1968, Ellsworth Raymond Bumpy Johnson took his last breath. The machines flatlined. The beeping stopped. The King of Harlem was dead, but his story wasn't over. July 13, 1968, Bumpy Johnson's funeral. They held it at the Abyssinian Baptist Church on 138th Street. The church held 2,500 people. Over 5,000 showed up. The streets were packed. People lined the sidewalks, stood on stoops, hung out of windows. Not just Harlem residents, politicians, jazz musicians, businessmen, even cops who'd respected him. And in the back, trying to stay unnoticed, were the mobsters. Frank Costello sat in the last pew, his face stoic, but his eyes red. Joe Colombo was there too, standing against the wall. Even Carlo Gambino sent representatives. The Italians had come to pay their respects to a man who'd been their equal, their rival, their sometime ally. Father Divine delivered the eulogy. He spoke about Bumpy's life, his struggles, his contradictions. A man who'd committed crimes but protected the innocent. A man who'd broken laws but lived by a code. A man who'd wielded power but never forgot where he came from.
And then Father Divine delivered Bumpy's message. "Bumpy Johnson wanted me to tell you something," Father Divine said, his voice echoing through the church. "He said Harlem was never about him. It was always about you. The power you gave him, he's giving back to you. He wants you to protect each other, to build something that lasts, not with violence, with unity, with love." The church was silent. Every person there felt the weight of those words. Then Father Divine turned toward the back of the church, toward where the Italian mobsters sat. "And to those who think Harlem is now vulnerable, who see opportunity in Bumpy's death, he had a message for you too. Harlem doesn't belong to any one man. It belongs to the people who live here. And they will fight to keep it."
Frank Costello's jaw tightened. He stood up, walked slowly down the aisle, every eye on him. He stopped in front of Bumpy's casket. The entire church held its breath. What was the mobster going to do? Frank Costello looked at the casket, at the man inside who'd been his friend, his rival, his equal. Then Frank did something nobody expected. He knelt. A 77-year-old Italian mob boss kneeling in front of a black man's casket in the heart of Harlem. And he cried. Not quietly, openly. His shoulders shook. Tears ran down his weathered face. People in the church started crying too. Not because they were sad, though they were, but because they understood what they were witnessing. Respect, real respect. The kind that transcends race, power, territory. The kind that's earned through decades of keeping your word. Frank stood up, wiped his eyes, turned to face the congregation. "My name is Frank Costello," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Most of you know who I am, and most of you have no reason to trust me. But I'm here to make a promise to Bumpy Johnson and to all of you." He paused, looked around the church. "Harlem will remain independent. The families will not move in. We will honor the agreements Bumpy made. And anyone who violates this, anyone from my world who tries to take what isn't theirs, will answer to me personally."
The church erupted, not in applause, but in a collective exhale. Relief, gratitude, hope. Frank walked back to his pew, sat down, and didn't speak again. Joe Colombo, standing against the wall, understood the message. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a decree. From that day forward, the 5 families left Harlem alone. Not completely. There were still negotiations, still deals, still money changing hands. But the takeover never happened. The heroin epidemic that destroyed other black neighborhoods in the 70s and 80s, Harlem was hit, but not as hard. Because Bumpy's people remembered his code, and the Italians remembered Frank's promise. After the funeral, Mamie went home to the brownstone on 122nd Street.
She opened the safe like Bumpy had asked. Inside was the letter.
She sat down, unfolded it, and read, "My dearest Mamie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry for that. Sorry I didn't get more time with you. Sorry I spent so much of our life looking over my shoulder, making deals, fighting wars. You deserved better than a gangster for a husband. But I hope I gave you something worth having. I hope I showed you that even men like me can love, can be loyal, can try to do right even when we do wrong. I'm leaving you everything, the house, the money, the businesses. But more importantly, I'm leaving you my reputation. People will come to you asking for help, asking for favors, asking you to fill the void I left. You don't have to do any of that. You can walk away.
Sell everything and live peacefully. You've earned that. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to protect what we built, then remember this: power without compassion is tyranny. Money without purpose is greed. Respect without love is fear. I tried to rule Harlem with all 3: power, purpose, and love. I didn't always succeed, but I tried. If you carry on, do better than I did. Build something that doesn't need a king. Build something that belongs to everyone. I love you, Mamie. I always have. I always will. Even in death, you'll be the queen of my heart. Forever yours, Ellsworth." Mamie folded the letter, held it to her chest, and cried. Not just for Bumpy, for everything he represented. The contradictions, the struggle, the impossible task of being a black man with power in a world designed to crush him. 3 weeks later, Mamie Johnson held a community meeting at the Abyssinian Baptist Church. Over 300 people attended. Business owners, policy bankers, community leaders, even some of Bumpy's old crew. Mamie stood at the podium, poised, powerful, every bit the queen Bumpy had called her. "My husband left us with a choice," she said. "We can fight over what he built, tear it apart, let outsiders take it, or we can honor what he stood for: community, protection, independence. I'm choosing the latter, and I'm asking you to join me." She laid out a plan, a community trust fund funded by the policy banks to help Harlem families, scholarships for kids, business loans for entrepreneurs, legal defense funds for those wrongly accused. Everything Bumpy had done informally, they would do formally, legitimately. It worked. For the next decade, Harlem thrived. Not without problems. Crime still existed, drugs still existed, poverty still existed. But the community was stronger, more organized, more protected. And Mamie Johnson, the quiet, elegant woman who'd stood beside Harlem's king, became its queen. Not through violence, through vision. Bumpy Johnson died on July 10, 1968. But what he whispered in those final hours, the promises he extracted, the love he expressed, the vision he left behind, that lived on. Frank Costello kept his word until he died in 1973. Joe Colombo honored the agreement until he was shot in 1971. The next generation of mob bosses, they tested the boundaries, but Harlem's people pushed back, just like Bumpy knew they would.
Years later, in 1997, a historian interviewed Junie Bird, then 92 years old. "What did Bumpy whisper to you before he died?" the historian asked. Junie smiled, that same knowing smile Bumpy used to give. "He told me to tell everyone he was sorry, that he tried his best, that we should do better than he did, build something that lasts, not with fear, with love." The historian frowned. "That doesn't sound like a gangster." Junie laughed. "That's because Bumpy Johnson was never just a gangster. He was a king, a protector, a man who understood that real power isn't what you take, it's what you give. And in his final hours, lying in that hospital bed, knowing death was coming, Bumpy Johnson gave Harlem everything he had left. His reputation, his connections, his code, his love."
And that's why when Frank Costello cried at his funeral, it wasn't out of weakness, it was out of respect. Because even the Mafia understood, Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a man, he was a legacy. If this story of loyalty, love, and last words moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you understand that real kings don't die, they live on through the people they protected. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the man who whispered his way into immortality. What would your last words be? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, the most powerful thing a man can leave behind isn't money or territory. It's a code, a vision, a promise. Bumpy Johnson left all three, and Harlem never forgot. At 3:15 p.m., the phone rang. Bumpy picked it up. "It's done." Junie's voice was shaking. "He's dead. They shot him on stage. At least 3 shooters, maybe more. Chaos everywhere. Police are swarming. Where's Betty?" "At the hospital. She rode in the ambulance with him. She won't leave his body. Get to her now." "Boss, she's surrounded by police, reporters, Nation of Islam people. I don't care if she's surrounded by the National Guard. You get to her, and you tell her Malcolm's last words to me. You tell her, Cairo. She'll understand." On it. Bumpy hung up, sat there for a moment in the empty restaurant. Malcolm X was dead. 39 years old, shot 15 times in front of 400 people, including his wife and daughters. The man who'd terrified white America, who'd inspired millions of black people to stand up, to fight back, to demand justice, was gone. But his daughters were still alive, and Bumpy had made a promise. By 6 p.m., Betty Shabazz was at Bumpy's safe house in Harlem. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 3 hours. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. Her dress still had Malcolm's blood on it. Her 4 daughters, the oldest barely 7, sat quietly on the couch, not understanding why Mommy was crying, why Daddy wasn't coming home. Junie stood by the door. Willie was outside watching for Nation of Islam soldiers who might be looking for loose ends.
"Mrs. Shabazz," Bumpy said gently, sitting across from her, "I know you want to stay here. I know you want to bury your husband. I know you want to fight. But Malcolm asked me to get you out. Tonight." Betty's voice was hollow, empty. "He knew. Of course he knew. Malcolm always knew. He came to see me 3 months ago. Said if anything happened, I should trust you, that you'd keep us safe. I will. But you have to leave. Now. I can't. I have to plan the funeral. I have to talk to the press. I have to." Her voice broke. "I have to do something. He's gone, and I have to do something. You have to protect your daughters," Bumpy said firmly, but kindly. "That's what Malcolm wanted. That's what he died for, so they could live."
Betty looked at her girls on the couch. The youngest was playing with a doll, oblivious. The oldest was staring at the wall,
processing trauma no child should experience. Where? Bumpy pulled out an envelope. 4 plane tickets to Cairo. A contact there will meet you at the airport. Money for 3 months. After that, Malcolm's international connections will take care of you. You'll be safe. The nation can't touch you there. What about Malcolm's body? What about the funeral? I'll handle it. I'll make sure he gets buried with honor. I'll make sure the world knows what happened. But you can't be here. If you stay, you're a target, and your daughters become targets. Malcolm wouldn't want that.
Betty took the envelope with shaking hands. She looked at the tickets, the cash, the address in Cairo. When do we leave? Tonight, 11 p.m. flight. Junie will drive you to the airport. Willie will make sure nobody follows. By morning, you'll be in Cairo, and your daughters will be safe. Betty started crying again, but she nodded. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Don't thank me. Just live. Raise your daughters. Tell them about their father. Make sure the world doesn't forget Malcolm X. At 10:30 p.m., Betty Shabazz and her 4 daughters got into Bumpy's car. Junie drove. Willie followed in a second car, watching for tails. They took back roads, side streets, avoiding main routes where Nation of Islam spotters might be waiting.
At 11:47 p.m., Betty and her daughters boarded a plane to Cairo. By 12:15 a.m., the plane was in the air. Bumpy watched from the terminal window until it disappeared into the night sky. He'd kept his promise. Malcolm's family was safe. But Bumpy wasn't done. February 22, 1965. The newspapers exploded with Malcolm X's assassination. Every paper in America ran it front page. Some called him a martyr. Others called him a troublemaker who'd finally paid the price. The Nation of Islam denied involvement, said Malcolm had created his own enemies. The FBI opened an investigation that everyone knew would go nowhere, and Harlem was ready to explode.
People wanted revenge. They wanted blood. They wanted someone to pay. Bumpy Johnson sat in Small's Paradise and made phone calls. The first was to every major black newspaper in America. I'm Bumpy Johnson. I run Harlem. And I'm telling you that Elijah Muhammad ordered Malcolm X's assassination. I can't prove it in court, but I know it. Everyone in Harlem knows it. You print that. You make sure the world knows. The second call was to Frank Costello. Frank, I need you to spread word through your people. Any Nation of Islam soldier who comes to Harlem looking to finish what they started, they don't leave. I don't care who they are or who sent them. They don't leave. You're starting a war, Bumpy. I'm finishing one. Malcolm's family is safe.
Now I'm making sure his killers understand there are consequences. Frank was quiet for a moment. How many men do you need? None. I'm not fighting them with soldiers. I'm fighting them with truth. The third call was to every minister, every community leader, every politician who'd ever worked with Malcolm. This is Bumpy Johnson. I'm organizing Malcolm's funeral, and I'm making it the biggest funeral Harlem has ever seen. I want 10,000 people in the streets. I want the world to see how much Malcolm meant to us. Can you help? Every single person said yes. February 27th, 1965, Malcolm X's funeral. They held it at the Faith Temple Church of God in Christ. The church held 1,000 people. Over 10,000 showed up. The streets were packed. People lined the sidewalks, stood on rooftops, hung from fire escapes. Black Muslims, Christians, atheists, militants, moderates, people who'd agreed with Malcolm and people who hadn't. All of them there to honor a man who'd refused to bow. Bumpy Johnson stood in the back of the church, watching. He wasn't part of the official ceremony. He wasn't family. He wasn't clergy. He was just a gangster who'd made a promise to a dying man. But when the eulogies were finished, when the tears had been shed, when they carried Malcolm's casket out to the hearse, something happened that nobody expected. The crowd parted. 10,000 people stepped back, creating a path, and Bumpy Johnson walked through it. He walked to the hearse, placed his hand on Malcolm's casket, and said something that only the pallbearers heard. "You kept your word, Malcolm. So did I. Your daughters are safe, your wife is safe, and your message will survive. That's my promise." Then Bumpy walked back through the crowd, got in his car, and left. The newspapers the next day didn't mention Bumpy Johnson. They talked about Malcolm's life, his legacy, his impact. They debated his methods, his beliefs, his evolution from Nation of Islam minister to independent revolutionary. They interviewed dozens of people, but they didn't interview the one man who'd kept Malcolm's final request.
And that was exactly how Bumpy wanted it. March 1965. The Nation of Islam tried to move into Harlem. They thought with Malcolm dead, with Bumpy keeping a low profile, they could establish a stronger presence. They were wrong. 3 Nation of Islam organizers came to Harlem to open a new mosque. They lasted 6 hours. Not because Bumpy's men beat them up, not because anyone threatened them, but because every single person they talked to said the same thing. "We know what you did to Malcolm. You're not welcome here. Leave." The organizers left. They never came back. By April, the Nation of Islam's presence in Harlem had collapsed completely, not through violence, through community rejection.
Bumpy had done what Malcolm couldn't. He'd turned Harlem against the nation, not with speeches or rhetoric, but with a simple message. They killed our brother. We don't forgive. We don't forget. April 1965. Bumpy received a letter. It was from Cairo. "Dear Mr. Johnson, I wanted you to know that we arrived safely. My daughters are adjusting well. They ask about their father every day, and I tell them the truth, that he was a great man who fought for justice, that he died for what he believed in, and that even in death, he made sure they were protected. I also tell them about you, not the stories people tell about Bumpy Johnson, the gangster, the criminal. I tell them about the man who kept a promise, the man who put my daughters on a plane when he could have walked away, the man who made sure Malcolm's funeral honored him properly. My daughters will grow up knowing that sometimes the most unexpected people are the ones who save you. Thank you for giving them a chance to grow up at all. With gratitude and respect, Betty Shabazz." Bumpy folded the letter, put it in his desk drawer, next to the photograph Malcolm had given him that night in Small's Paradise. 3 little girls who were now safe, growing up in Cairo, far from the violence that had taken their father. Years later, in 1972, Betty Shabazz returned to America with her daughters. She earned a doctorate. She taught. She raised her family. She kept Malcolm's legacy alive through speeches, interviews, books. She never publicly spoke about how she escaped New York the night Malcolm died, never mentioned Bumpy Johnson's name in interviews. But every year on February 21st, the anniversary of Malcolm's death, she sent Bumpy a card. No message, just a card with a picture of her daughters, showing him they were alive, happy, safe, that his promise had been kept. Bumpy kept every card, never showed them to anyone, never talked about what he'd done. When reporters asked him about Malcolm X, Bumpy would say, "Malcolm was a great man. I respected him. That's all." But people close to Bumpy knew the truth. Junie, Willie, even Mamie. They knew that Malcolm X's final request had changed something in Bumpy Johnson, made him realize that power wasn't just about controlling territory or making money. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. In 1968, when Bumpy was dying, one of his final visitors was unexpected. A telegram from Betty Shabazz in Cairo. It said, "My daughters are grown now, strong, educated, alive, because of you. Malcolm was right to trust you. Thank you for being the kind of man who keeps promises. You gave my family a future. I pray you find peace. Betty." Bumpy read that telegram 3 times. Then he handed it to Mamie. "When I die," he said, his voice weak, "I want you to write to Betty. Tell her I kept my promise to the end. Tell her Malcolm's daughters were worth it." Mamie squeezed his hand. "I will." February 21st, 1972, 7 years after Malcolm X's assassination.
Betty Shabazz stood in front of 3,000 people at a memorial service in Harlem. She spoke about Malcolm's vision, his courage, his love for his people. And then she said something that surprised everyone. Malcolm believed that revolution wasn't just about tearing down systems of oppression. It was about building networks of protection.
He believed that sometimes the people who protect us don't look like activists or ministers. Sometimes they look like the least likely allies. The audience murmured, confused. Betty continued. In his final months, Malcolm asked someone for help. Someone who didn't share his politics. Someone who lived a life Malcolm spent years speaking against. But this person said yes, and because of that yes, my daughters are alive today. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. I can't name this person, they wouldn't want me to. But I want everyone here to understand something. Justice isn't just about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about small promises kept in the dark. Sometimes it's about unexpected allies who do the right thing when nobody's watching. Malcolm knew that, and I'll spend the rest of my life grateful that he did. The audience erupted in applause. They didn't know who Betty was talking about, but in the back of the room, Junie Bird, now 75 years old, smiled. He knew. Willie Jackson, sitting beside him, knew too. And Mamie Johnson, sitting alone in a pew near the front, wiped away tears, because she knew that her husband, dead for 4 years, had done something remarkable. He'd saved Malcolm X's family, and in doing so, he'd proven that sometimes the most important revolutions happen in silence, that sometimes the most powerful acts of justice are the ones nobody sees, that sometimes a gangster and a revolutionary can share the same goal: protection, legacy, love. March 1975. Malcolm X's daughter, Atala, now 20 years old, visited New York for the first time since her father's death. She went to Harlem, walked the streets Malcolm had walked, visited the Audubon Ballroom where he'd been killed. And then she did something unexpected. She went to Small's Paradise. The restaurant was still there, still operating, though Bumpy had been dead for 7 years. She sat in Bumpy's old booth, ordered coffee, and waited. Junie Bird, now 78, walked in. He'd heard she was looking for him. Miss Shabazz, he said gently. Mr. Bird, thank you for meeting me. Of course. What can I do for you? Atala looked around the restaurant, at the place where her father had met with Bumpy Johnson 10 years earlier.
I wanted to thank you. For what?
For keeping my mother and sisters safe, for helping us escape, for making sure we had a chance to grow up. Junie's eyes got wet. That was Bumpy's promise, not mine. But you helped, my mother told me. You drove us to the airport. You made sure we got on that plane. You risked your life for strangers. That's what Bumpy taught us, Junie said. Protect people. Keep your word. Do what's right, even when it's hard. My father was right to trust him, Atala said. And I wanted you to know that his trust wasn't misplaced. We survived. We thrived. And we'll make sure the world never forgets Malcolm X, or the people who helped him. Junie smiled. Your father was a great man, Miss Shabazz. So was Bumpy Johnson, Atala said, in his own way.
Yeah, Junie said softly. In his own way. Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21, 1965. 3 men were convicted. 2 were later exonerated. The truth about who really ordered the killing remains disputed, though most historians believe the Nation of Islam was responsible. Elijah Muhammad died in 1975. He was never charged. The FBI's surveillance of Malcolm was declassified decades later, revealing they knew about threats to his life and did nothing. Betty Shabazz raised 6 daughters alone. She became Dr. Betty Shabazz, earned a doctorate in education, taught at Medgar Evers College, and kept Malcolm's legacy alive until her death in 1997. Her daughters grew up to become educators, activists, and community leaders. All of them credit their mother's strength and courage.
None of them publicly discuss how they escaped New York in 1965.
But family histories, passed down privately, tell of a man who made a promise, a man who kept that promise when everyone else walked away, a man named Bumpy Johnson. This isn't the story the history books tell. The books talk about Malcolm's ideology, his speeches, his impact on the civil rights movement.
They don't talk about a 2 a.m. meeting in a Harlem nightclub. They don't talk about a gangster who put a widow and 4 children on a plane to safety. They don't talk about the quiet promise that saved a family. But it happened. Malcolm X knew he was going to die. He made peace with it. But he refused to let his family pay for his revolution. So he asked the one man in Harlem with the power to protect them, a man who lived by a code.
A man who kept his word.
And Bumpy Johnson did something that shocked everyone. Not with violence, not with guns, not with the tools people expected from a gangster. He kept a promise. He saved a family. He honored a revolutionary's final request. That's power. Real power. The kind that doesn't make headlines. The kind that changes lives. If this story of an unlikely alliance, a kept promise, and the protection of Malcolm X's family moved you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe that sometimes heroes come from unexpected places. Share this with someone who needs to know that real power is keeping your word when nobody's watching. What would you have done in Bumpy's position? Let me know in the comments.
And remember, history isn't just about the people who make speeches. It's about the people who keep promises. Bumpy Johnson kept his, and Malcolm X's daughters lived because of it.